Abbiamo adesso un relatore molto atteso, Tom Barrack, CEO di Colony Capital, fondatore di Private Equity Colony Capital, ed è lui che ci apre a questo mondo, poi continueremo l'escursus con Roccoforte, dell'ospitalità di gran lusso, un'ospitalità molto raffinata, un'ospitalità che ci fa onore. E quindi impariamo da Tom Barrack. Presidente, eccolo qua. Hi, very pleased to have you here.
Thank you so much.
I guess you are having your speech in English, right?
Yes.
And we will have a translation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Buongiorno, and excuse me for speaking English, but if I spoke Italian, it would be a very short presentation. I thought what would be interesting, and I prepared a presentation just to prove to you that I have some useless knowledge that might be of benefit. And I'm not really going to stick to the presentation. We have little zip drives that you can take the presentation home. But after listening to the Bain presentation, which I thought was amazingly brilliant, what I wanted to do is just share with you, as a foreigner, my perspective, which is much more positive, about what the opportunities in Italy are. And it comes from an immigrant coming to the Italian shores, as we all did, with the dream of all things Italian. And all of you are part of this necklace, which are these diamonds, these rubies, these sapphires, of all things Italian. And you're concentrating on your own diamond, your own sapphire, your own ruby. But the world really looks at it as a necklace. All it sees is all things Italian. To me, this is where the opportunity is, and this is where the problem is. And I'm not going to deal with much of the economics, which reminds me of a cute story. There's a female banker who's walking through Central Park in New York, and she's walking around the lake, and she looks down and she sees this beautiful little frog. And the frog looks up at her and says, "Please, fair maiden, could you pick me up?" She says, "My goodness, a talking frog." She reaches down and she picks it up, and she says, "Well, what happened to you?" And the frog says, "Well, I was an economist, and I made a couple of bad calls, and my boss turned me into a frog. But if a banker would kiss me, I could turn back into an economist." She said, "Oh, that's very interesting." And she took the little frog, and she put it in her Prada bag. She's walking along, and the frog says, but wait, aren't you going to kiss me?" She said, "Actually, you're worth much more to me as a talking frog than an economist." So these slides are really here just to show the volatility of what we're all living through and why we're here with each other trying to get some idea of what's going on in the world. And I can tell you right now, I have no idea. I am the most confused about the predictability or the visibility of what's in front of us. You have these equity markets, mostly North American driven, that in the last 4 months have soared. We've gone from PE multiples of 8 times to 18 times in 90 days. When you sit with North American CEOs, like you're all sitting here together, and say, "How's business?" they tell you it stinks. They tell you it stinks, but their equity values have increased 50% in 90 days. The gross revenue line of almost every business at every level continues to deteriorate, and the easy narrowing of costs and expenses has already been completed. Everybody's tightened their belt as much as they can. So the fundamentals in the marketplace everywhere, including Europe, are challenging. Yet the unbelievable profuseness of capital, the liquidity that's being driven into the system from central banks all over the world, are driving these equity markets that are based on relative returns higher and higher and higher. I'm going to skip through a lot of this and just get to a couple of takeaways that I think are interesting. And brand is really it for you. I have the opportunity of being a sophisticated concierge during the summers in Sardinia. And I've learned so much because you have, in watching the luxury yacht presentation and looking at what's happening to the luxury yacht values, in that little window of 90 days in a place like Sardinia, you see all elements of life. And the mega yachts come, and the first thing that they want to do when they get there is get off the boat. And they want to go to a restaurant or a hotel. And all of the tourists come, and the first thing they want to do when they get to the hotel or restaurant is get on the boat. And then both of them, after the first day, want to go to somebody's house because they can't stand being where they are. And you have this little parade of a dance that goes on amongst everybody. But the reason that they come is not the beautiful newness of a hotel room. As you all know, the hotel rooms in that particular spot, much like the rest of Italy. By the way, 90% of all the hotel rooms in Italy are owned by moms and pops, by families. And most of them are under 100 rooms. And so you hear many of the pundits say, well, the answer for Italy is it has to become more commoditized. It has to have a better delivery system. It has to have modernized systems. And actually, my belief is exactly the opposite, is that the structure of what makes the touristic industry here different is that it's not simple, it's not fluid, it's not slick. It's Italian, like all things Italian. You can, going back to my example of Palm Island in Dubai, we built a Roman room. And in that room, we have the most magnificent cappuccino machines, incredible, the most unbelievable Italian porcelains, Italian coffee, Italian milk, Italian silks, and your cappuccino is made by an Indian. The experience of that cappuccino is not the foam and the espresso. It's walking into Cova and having that dialogue with a barman who speaks 6 languages and you speak 1, and feeling Italy, the scent, the smell, the taste, and we're losing that. And we're losing that for all the reasons that were in the Bain presentation. Everybody outside of this room is getting older. We're not. Having less children. The degentrification of what's happening in Italy is an issue. The immigration is increasing at a huge amount. And this brand, which is based on trust, loyalty, vision, is becoming confused. So what happens when it becomes confused is a mistrust. And you have the best advertising system in the whole world. I was in Bandar Begawan, which is the capital of Brunei. And it's a godforsaken place. I mean, God gave them all the money in the world because there was nothing else there. And I finally went to, I was in a little tiny hotel, and I finally went to the concierge, and I said, is there some place I can get a bowl of pasta? He says, you know, it's amazing that you said that. Because if you go 14 miles out this road, so he gave me directions of a place to go. I drive out there, and here's Luigi, and he created a little oasis. So you sit here and have pasta aglio olio, unbelievable bufalo mozzarella. You have everything in a little Italy. And when you talk to the locals, the only thing they can dream of is one day going and seeing where Luigi was actually from. And this happens all over the world. The Italian expatriates, wherever they go, create an oasis and are the lure for all these developing countries, whether it's China, whether it's Brazil, whether it's Indian. At some point, they want the experience. They don't want the cheapness. Why, when you go to Hong Kong, do you find the Americans that are in Hong Kong want to go to Shenzhen so they can buy knockoffs, and the Chinese come to Hong Kong because they want a Ferragamo or a Prada or a Cavalli? It's not about cost. All of these generic things that are going on in the world, if you're set on growth, are interesting. But why growth? It's a time where I sit down and say, the name of the game today is survival. It's not growth. We can talk about growth all we want. Interesting time, right? Because all of our competitors, all of your competitors in every business, are under the same illusions of non-transparency. So market share is being obliterated. Competitive barriers are being obliterated. People are looking for more value at a lower cost. And once you go down that track, it's very difficult to ever come back. In the hotel industry, we have a saying, what you see is in statistics, and we'll kind of run, I'm going to go through all this, you can look at this on your own, is you have people telling you in the hotel business that occupancies are firming. Well, I don't know what occupancies firming means, because occupancies firm because rates drop. So what happens when you have an empty hotel room, if you have an empty hotel room that you were selling for 160 euros, and you drop your prices on a search engine to 100 euros, your occupancy levels will come back. But recovering that rate may never come back. So what's happening all over the world, groups are not coming, conventions have stopped, business travelers are looking for alternate options, and tourists are looking for total package value, and experiences are becoming commoditized. So I think that the most interesting thing that I can share with you is just my perspective of what the Italian advantages are and what the Italian disadvantages are from somebody who toils in the business climate here, trying to figure it out from a little tiny perspective. The naturally hospitable and warm domestic population is the number one. God created some beautiful places with the most despicable people in the world. He created some places that have amazing, wonderful people and terrible terrain. Italy happens to be one where both of those things are in harmony, and you have more than 50% of all the antiquities in the world right here. You have the most historical landmark sites in Europe. You've got a culture which is an art of living. Everywhere in the world, people envy and want to replicate this art of living. Nobody understands exactly how you pay for it, but they want to replicate it. The world leader in design, cuisine, wine, football. And the only thing that I realize is to understand Italy, you have to understand football. And no one understands football. But the difference is, everybody else in the Mediterranean thinks they have the same thing. Right? If you go to France, they will tell you they're a leader in design, they produce incredible wine, they have fantastic cuisine. But if you talk to the user of that experience, it's a very different experience than the Italian experience. And the commoditization of that Italian experience will destroy it. So the touristic attractions that exist today don't need to be newly constructed. They're here. From the sea to the mountains, they exist. What doesn't exist is a system to organize it, a system to use it. And the cost of it, not the cost of the hotelier, not the cost of the restaurant, but the cost of moving through the system is remarkably expensive compared to the competitive set. So if you look at the infrastructure system, trains, airplanes, roads, which are very complicated. And sometimes that complication makes it more interesting. It would make it more interesting if it were at a lower cost. The problem is it's not more interesting when it's more complicated and it's 1.5 times more expensive than France, 2.5 times more expensive than Spain, 4 times more expensive than Greece. And by the way, I have to tell you, every one of those countries is competing for your client, every one. And they're better organized. So the irony of Italy is the individuals, the businesses are the best in the world and have been through these governmental crises so many times that you don't pay attention to it. So the Italian business functions in spite of the government. It's not led by the government. Now the quest is, if you could ever figure out a way to allow the government to lead you and refine these systems, it would be dominant. Right? During the summers, a 90-day summer, everybody's competing for that same customer in the Mediterranean. Everybody. So what's the decision process for that customer to go to one place to another? And how does a mom and pop that has a 70-room hotel in Sicily or outside of Capri or Positano ever communicate its offer to a tourist who happens to be in northern Italy? There's no system. Most people, even in the touristic business, cannot name who the minister of tourism is in Italy. Don't know. It's more expensive to fly from Milano to Olbia than Milano, New York. So a 26-year-old who says, let's go to Sardinia for the weekend, says, oh, that's great. Let's hop on an airplane. It's a €100 hotel room. Air flight is $300. Hotel room is $100. Taxi cab from the airport to the hotel is $100. And a cappuccino is €7. Let's go to New York instead. This is the problem. It's not who's making the cappuccino. It's not the hotelier. It's not that people want unbelievably more value for their money. They just want some value for their money. And the poor entrepreneur, the one who's providing all the services, is fighting a battle they can't win because those things are not controlled by them. They're controlled by somebody else. The difficult foreign direct investment laws is just, you know the complexity of that. And by the way, I think foreign investors are very naive, thinking they're going to come to Italy because you need money. It's not the case. Italy's a rich country. The banking system is par excellence. It takes care of itself. The business groups are very clubby and very tight. Not an easy place for foreigners to enter. The inefficient state bureaucracy, the complex tax and employee requirements, it's a huge problem. It's also a huge benefit. Right? I went to Cova this morning. We were standing at the bar, and I was just asking some of the people that were sitting with me, how are things? Everybody feels that things are pretty good. Well, things are pretty good because the Italian debt per GDP is the highest in Europe. The Italian subsidies per employee per population are the highest in Europe. So the great thing is, you, unlike we in North America, had the government load up on debt, but you don't load up on debt. So Italians have very low mortgages on their house, if any. Until the last 4 or 5 years, really, consumer debt, credit cards were not a highly utilized commodity. And the system operated really outside of itself on a cash basis without regard to these crises. Versus America, where everybody bought a house at least at a 95% mortgage, and everybody lives on credit cards. So you had the stability inside the system that made a tremendous amount of sense. But now you're having all the things that go along with that, with government spending as a percentage of GDP being the highest. Where is it going to go? And where is the growth? Who are you going to sell to? Who are you going to sell to? And how are you going to compete for that tourist? There's only 2 things you can do. Either get them to come here or send your stuff there. So we all look at China and say, well, the future of the world is China. I'm not so sure. China has just spent 33% of its GDP in a stimulus package. 20 percentage points more than any country in the world. So what happens when everybody turns off the stimulus? What happens when America turns off the stimulus? We've had this run-up of kind of third quarter earnings, this volley in the U.S. of $3 trillion being dumped into a system in 7 months. Same thing in China. Same thing in Brazil. All of a sudden, Brazil becomes an investment-grade country. Brazil says, excuse me, I have to reconsider whether we're going to use the dollar as a par currency. Right? This is an amazing moment in the world, of which none of us can control. There's nothing you can do that's going to affect whether China becomes more dominant or less dominant. So my point of view is that what we all have to do is just concentrate 95% of our time on the things that we can control. And I've given you a lot of numbers here on travel and tourism. By the way, real estate business everywhere, forget it. The lagging effect of what happens in real estate, which is also good news for you. As producers, as manufacturers, one of the largest components of your overall fixed costs is real estate. Real estate rents and real estate values all over the world in the commercial sector have corrected themselves by 35 to 50% and are continuing down, which means on a recorrected rental basis for stores and operations you have around the world, they're going to continue down. So it seems to me that concentrating on what's in front of you, the brand purity of all things Italian, and really the dilemma that we all have is keeping a smile on all of our employees' faces so that in turn they keep a smile on the customers' faces. You're doing everything you can do. Everybody's cutting costs and expenses. Everybody's trying to refine and define values. The opportunity that you have as Italians is that the brand is Italy. People see the necklace. But to have the necklace, you have to create some sort of a seamless chain instead of acting like individual diamonds, individual rubies, individual sapphires. And if you can figure out how to do that with a cooperative government and administration, there's no one who can compete with the taste, with the smell, with the sense of all things Italian. Thank you for taking your time. I know it's right before lunch. Appreciate it. Thanks.